I would like to call to order this regular board meeting of the North County Transit District for April 18, 2019. And I would like the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, sir. Jack Feller.
Here.
Tony Krantz.
Here.
John Franklin.
Here.
Paul McNamara. I'm sorry, Michael Marasco. Jim Desmond.
Here.
Dave Drucker. Joel Edson. Sharon Jenkins. Priya Bhat Patel.
Did you take the train, or were you in bumper to bumper traffic?
All right, if you would all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. And the clerk will now provide a safety brief and evacuation procedure.
Thank you, sir. In the event of an emergency, I will dial 911. In the event of an evacuation, please do so using the stairwells. Do not use the elevators. Once outside the building, please do not enter the building unless told to do so by emergency personnel. We have fire extinguishers on each floor of this building. We also have a portable defibrillator on the first floor, and staff on hand trained on CPR procedures. That concludes my safety brief, sir.
Very good, thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, sir. Agenda item number 7, award agreements for temporary staffing services on consent. The staff report was electronically sent to the board members as well as hard copies provided in your folder. Modifications were made to the staff report to provide additional information regarding the procurement process and to ensure a complete record. No proposed changes to the staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public speakers?
No, sir.
All right, that brings us to approval of the minutes for the regular board meeting of March 21st, 2019. Okay, motion by Drucker, second by Edson. Please vote.
On the motion of board member Dave Drucker, seconded by board member Joel Edson to approve the minutes of the regular board meeting held on March 21st, 2019. Motion passes with all members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar, items 1 through 10 are on consent. And may I have a motion for approval? All right, motion by board member Edson and a second by board member Franklin.
On the motion of board member Joel Edson, seconded by board member John Franklin to approve consent items 1 through 10. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Thank you. Moving on to other business items 11 through 16, starting with item 11, approve amended and restated employment agreement between NCTD and our general counsel. Reviewing this item will be Karen Tukolsky, Chief Administrative Officer.
Good afternoon, board members. Thank you, Chair. So as you are aware, the Board of Directors conducts an annual performance review of the General Counsel per her employment agreement. The process started with a preliminary review by the Executive Committee. The committee reached consensus on a proposed evaluation rating and requested the Board Chair and Vice Chair to meet with General Counsel to negotiate an extended agreement. The proposed evaluation rating and extended agreement terms were reviewed by the full board in closed session last month. In that meeting, the board members reached consensus on the proposed evaluation rating and the amended employment agreement. Therefore, this matter is now before you today for action as detailed in the staff report. Accordingly, the recommendation is to approve the amended and restated employment agreement between the North County Transit District and General Counsel based on results of the annual performance evaluation conducted by the Board of Directors to address compensation and update other terms and conditions of the agreement. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any speakers?
No, sir.
No public speakers. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
I'll move to approve item 11.
All right, on a motion by Board Member Desmond and a second by Board Member Drucker, we will now vote.
On the motion of Board Member Jim Desmond, second by Board Member Dave Drucker to approve agenda item number 11, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 12, adoption of resolution 1903, approving modifications to board policy number 19, delegation of authority to the executive director. Jennifer Taylor, the chief procurement and contract officer, will review this item.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the Board of Directors. I'm Jennifer Taylor, Chief Procurement and Contract Administration Officer for the North County Transit District. The item before you for consideration is a revision to the delegation of authority under Board Policy number 19. The current policy authorizes the Executive Director to enter into contracts up to $100,000, amend contracts up to $50,000 singular or cumulatively, as long as they don't increase the original contract over $100,000, and award task orders up to $100,000. All of the items that are approved under this delegated authority are presented to the board for approval quarterly, as you would see under item number 3 under today's consent item. On February 21st, the Board of Directors elected to participate in the California's Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act. The act authorizes North County Transit District to solicit for public projects using the informal bid procedures up to $200,000. Informal bid procedures include reduced bid times with no requirement to advertise in the newspaper of general circulation. All informal bids above $5,000 have a requirement that staff seeks a minimum of 3 competitive quotes. With the authority provided under the current board policy number 19, staff produces a lot of documentation to present to the board for consideration. Over the last 2 years, staff has prepared 143 contract-related reports and related material for the board for that consideration. Many of these items are for routine required activities for continued operation, such as software license agreements, facilities maintenance, and other routine business. The board preparation cycle for each contract item takes approximately 8 weeks and several hours of staff time each month. In many cases, contract amendments did not exceed the authority delegated to the executive director at the time of award, because the increase would take it over his authority or over the $100,000. Work has to either stop and seek board approval, or the board is asked to ratify that contract action. As mentioned earlier, most of the activity that NCTD processes for regular routine business is over $100,000. Staff conducted a survey of public agencies throughout San Diego County and to determine the thresholds delegated from their governing bodies. And that range was from $15,000 to $5 million. And we looked at cities and the county, school districts, as well as transit districts. To realize efficiencies in both the procurement and board processes, staff is recommending a revision to Board Policy 19 to increase the executive director's authority to enter into agreements up to $200,000 to correspond with the provisions of the Act, amend contracts up to $100,000 singular or cumulatively, and award task orders up to $200,000, keeping the requirement in the revised policy to report back to the board quarterly on all of those actions. I'm a lot of breath. The proposed revisions to the contracting authority was reviewed by the executive committee on April 4th, and the executive committee approved the revisions for advancement to the full board for consideration. This table here just illustrates the changes that we're proposing. The current Board Policy 19 authorized the Executive Director to enter into new contracts for $100,000, and we're proposing 200. Contract amendments would be increased from $50,000 to $100,000. Task order agreements from $100,000 to $200,000. And with that, staff recommends the board adopt resolution number 1903, revising Board Policy 19, delegation of authority to Executive Director. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Anthony. Do we have any public speakers on this item?
No, sir.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
All right.
Do we publish decisions made by the executive director? Are those published for the board in a regular publication?
Yes, it's actually on the agenda, item number 3, contract actions by the executive director. I will clarify, even though it says that contract actions by the executive director, it's a delegated authority to the chief procurement officer. But we report on a quarterly basis to you those actions.
Okay, so those appear in our agenda.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. I would second your motion to approve.
I do make a motion to approve.
I have a question. Matt, you going to spend this money wisely?
Yes, and as I was just saying, it clearly overstates the level of responsibility and the involvement of the executive director. Jennifer
Thank you very much.
reports to.
I know, it's like, yeah. Then he gives me a long answer.
All right. On a motion by Vice Chair Feller and a second by Board Member Franklin. We will now vote.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Feller, seconded by Board Member John Franklin to approve agenda item number 12, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 13, Eric Rowe, Chief Operations Officer, will review item 13, which is authorization for the Executive Director to negotiate and execute another change order for the Charger locomotives.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. This is for a limited notice proceed for the purchase of 2 additional locomotives with Siemens. So NCTD currently has a fleet of 7 locomotives. We have 2 F-59 locomotives that were purchased in 2001 and 5 F-40 locomotives that were purchased as a refurbished locomotive in 1993 for the start of service. On June 21st of 2018 last year, the board approved the purchase of the 5 Siemens Charger locomotives at a cost of a little over $37 million to replace the 5 F-40 locomotives, the older ones, and an option to purchase 4 additional locomotives. So the 2 F-59 locomotives, they are 18 years old and they are nearing the end of their useful life. Over the last 2 years, both of those combined locomotives have had approximately 44 failures in revenue service. So they are reaching that end of that useful life there. So in NCTD staff, we've determined that it's not cost advantageous to overhaul the F-59s with the proximity to the ocean. As you know, we store our locomotives at Camp Pendleton, so we're about half a mile from the ocean all night long. So we had a lot of corrosion out there, and the estimate for an overhaul would be about 3.3 million versus 7 million for a 7.4 million for a new locomotive. The new locomotives are much cleaner, much greener. They are a tier 4 emissions. Our current F-59s are a tier 2 emissions for the prime mover. They have a separate HEP head end power engine, which is actually a tier 0. That's what provides the electricity to the coaches. So if we were to execute this limited notice to proceed in the subsequent full notice to proceed, Siemens anticipates we'd be able to receive these locomotives by December 2020. Typical lead time for a locomotive is approximately 3 years, but Siemens has a order for 75 Charger locomotives from Amtrak, and an additional 34 for Via Rail. And with this notice to proceed, for the long lead time items, they've made it so that we will be able to put these 2 locomotives at the end of our order before those 2 orders of the 75 and 34. So we would get them consecutive with our other locomotives. If we don't act, they will move to the production cycle for those Amtrak's in the Via Rail, and then we would be in the mid-2024 range to be receive these two locomotives. So the limited notice to proceed we're seeking today is for some long lead time items. So the bogies, trucks, as they were with gearboxes and traction motors, the traction converters, the head end power transformers, the brake equipment, car shell, laser cutting of the welded parts, some PTC equipment, central control unit, and the master controller. All of these are very long lead time items. And so if we're able to extend forward with these, they'll be able to start that production on those. Next slide. So funding for the F-59. So it's approximately $15 million for those two locomotives. We don't at this point have a secured funding for that. And that's why we're looking at this limited notice to proceed to get us to move forward. And so that's in the agreement to advance potential procurement for the two additional locomotives for this limited notice to proceed. And it's $1 million a locomotive. That's the $2 million, and they expect payment within 30 days. We have the funding for the $2 million. We don't have the funding for the 15 yet. So staff is negotiating with Siemens regarding the structure of the proposed limited notice to proceed. And if we can come up with the funding, we will return to the board for the full exercise of these options if it is in the best interest of NCTD. Slide. So here's the funding strategy. These are, again, much cleaner locomotives. So there is a Carl Moyer grant from the Air Resources Board. And so we received $10 million for the 5 locomotives that we purchased last time, $2 million a piece. Based on the Carl Moyer grant, there's a $30,000 per ton grant for the reduction up to 85% of the total project cost. So the amount of greenhouse gases we would reduce exceeds the cost with this $30,000, exceeds the cost of the locomotives. So we would be capped at the $85,000 or 85%, sorry, 85% of the total budget, which is at $12.6 million for those two locomotives. And this is dependent on, the supplemental award for the State Air Resources Board. And so these applications are typically accepted in the summer, and the awards are made towards late fall, early spring. And then we're also looking at state rail assistance funds.
I'll go back to that slide. Yes. So this is a big deal in terms of the Air Pollution Control District. And this is where we're going to look for a lot of support from our local elected officials. What we're going to need is help at the state level so that the San Diego region can receive a higher allocation from the Air Resources Board to the San Diego AP Air Pollution Control District, so that we can maximize the amount of dollars that we get for the purchase of these two locomotives. And so this is something where our elected officials can advocate and help us be able to fund these locomotives with a significant amount of funding coming through the Carl Moyer program. And so it's our goal that we will be able to engage Supervisor Fletcher, because he's at the state board, as well as Supervisor Desmond and Supervisor Gaspar, in terms of helping us, as well as our individual board members reaching out at the state level, because typically I think San Diego receives about $3 million per year. And so they would obviously need a larger allocation. I will give the precedence of when Metrolink purchased its locomotives. Its equivalent Air Pollution Control District contributed on a much larger purchase, closer to a 50% range. And if you look at our 5 purchase plus these additional locomotives, that would bring us more closely in alignment to a 40% contribution across the board. So this is something that we definitely need political leadership and support so that we can make this happen.
Board Member Edson.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. So the Carl Moyer grant, is that competitive or formula?
Competitive.
Okay. So there's no guarantee of...
No guarantee. I will say I have been working similar to the first application for the 5 locomotives. I have been working with the County Air Pollution Control District. We've been exchanging information with them in advance of an application opening period to make sure that they have all of the information that they need from us.
Okay, and then my next question, we currently have a fleet of 7 locomotives. We have 5 on order. This would be 2 more. That brings us back to 7. We would be ditching the 2 Tier 2 locomotives or replacing those 2 Tier 2s. That leaves us with the 5 F40s. What's the tier rating on the 5 F40s?
So remember, we've already placed the order for 5 new locomotives that
Right.
are Tier 4.
Right. So
The locomotives that they're replacing are Tier 0.
Okay.
And so then the locomotives that we're proposing to replace with this are Tier 2 locomotives, with the exact same locomotives from Siemens that were part of the 5 purchase before.
So the F40s
That brings us to
are-
a total of 7. And then, and I know we have a subsequent agenda item for 2 capacity enhancing locomotives later in this agenda to bring the total fleet to 9.
Okay, that's where I was going.
And so the grant requires, the Carl Moyer grant requires the destruction of the old locomotive. So because you're getting money to replace, a polluter, you have to physically completely make them inoperable and unserviceable in the future.
So the F40s are Tier 0?
Correct.
Oh, whoa. Those got to go.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you very much. Actually, I did have a question on what we do with the retired locomotives. So we destroy them.
Yes.
What does the cost look like for that?
Well, we're actually putting together a scope of work for both scrapping and retirement.
Okay. And do we at any point for when we do destroy those, is there anything in terms of receiving any financial incentives for it or not necessarily? It's just, it's going to be us in the
No,
in the
that's
hole for that.
that's the Carl Moyer grant.
Okay.
The Carl Moyer grant essentially moving from that Tier 0 or Tier 2 to a Tier 4 technology provides a benefit for a cleaner environment, and then we do away with that higher polluting.
Okay. And then what is, similar to Board Member Edson, what is the expected success rate, do you think, for the grant funding? And then if we don't receive it, what happens to the $2 million that we initially invest?
I'm not sure we.
Oh, did you put it in there?
So this is the beautiful new locomotives and stuff. But so what'll happen, and these are the ones that are on order. So nice, pretty picture. But so what ends up happening if we don't end up executing a full notice to proceed? The money will go towards either the purchase of those as spare parts or transfer over to additional spare parts that we're looking to purchase.
And as Lori just reminded me, and in fact, I just responded to an email this morning to the Air Pollution Control District. We're not going to enter into any formal agreement until the application period opens for the Carl Moyer grant and until we determine that we have received a grant.
Okay. And then, let's see here. I had one last question. I know you mentioned that you need us to advocate. How are you looking for letters of support? What are you looking for in that case?
Yeah, I think it is going to be letters of support. There are some one-on-one meetings that people, that it would be helpful to help explain exactly what we're trying to do. And the board chair and I, we've already talked a little bit about how to make that happen.
Great, thank you.
Board Member Duker.
Do we get any money for like the metal and parts for the scrapping? So we're going to go out to bid for both the scrapping, for selling the scrap and for disposal.
So it won't be most likely, so I'm talking to Metrolink, it's not going to recover all the cost of scrapping it, but it is mostly metal there, but it does require sort of a CARB certified engine. So it's actually the prime mover and the HEP engine that have to be destroyed. The car shell, we're just going to get rid of it because there's no value to it except for the scrap. But they need to, it's not just the hole in the engine, it needs to be rendered completely inoperable so nobody anywhere in the country could ever run this locomotive again.
Question.
Board Member Desmond.
Thanks. I guess, Matt, for advocating for the grants, particularly from the state. I mean, can you let us know or let me know the timing on that so that I can advocate to my fellow supervisors that are on CARB for that when that comes up. I had hard enough time to keep my track of my own schedule. Somebody else's.
Absolutely. We already plan to do that with you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, yes, the statistic about the breakdowns on these locomotives is pretty scary. You know, we trying to track riders, and one way to lose them really fast is to not get them to their appointed place at the appointed time. Most people riding our commuter rail are going to their jobs, or they're going to an event that needs, you know, that starts at a particular time. So replacing these locomotives, the entire fleet, is pretty critical, I think. So, Board Member Franklin.
I got a silly question. Are these locomotives that we're replacing, are there locomotives other places in the world that are less clean than those? In other words, why wouldn't we send these things out of the country where they might actually be cleaner than what's operating somewhere else and push our older technology out if that would have the dual benefit of not being a cost center to destroy it? Maybe it's not legally allowed, but I'm still making the point anyway. Okay. Because why wouldn't we advocate sending them to Mexico or South America? They could be put to use. Maybe they're cleaner than the ones that are there, and we could give them away. It'd be cheaper than paying somebody to destroy them if it's a cost center, get rid of them, and it would be an environmental benefit. More of a comment than a question, because I know you're going to tell me the law won't allow it, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The grant conditions won't allow that.
Why don't we suggest to the policymakers that are those locomotives cleaner than ones being used in the third world?
I have no idea.
Well, it's a good question, because if we could give them away, that might be cheaper than having to pay to destroy them.
Anthony, are there any speakers on this line?
No, sir.
I would entertain a motion if there are no more questions.
I move approval.
Second?
All right, on a motion by Vice Chair Feller and a second by Board Member Edson, we will now vote.
On the motion of Board Vice Chair Jack Feller, seconded by Board Member Joel Edson to approve agenda item number 13, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 14, approval of task order agreement number 5 to agreement number 16041 with IBI Group for FY 2019 bus stop improvement design services and bid and construction support. We have Damon and Tracy here to present that.
Good afternoon. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're going to be talking about the bus stop, sort of the second step in the bus stop optimization program, which is implementing improvements to bus stops throughout our service area. From the last meeting, you recall the program goals for the optimization program were to improve transit speed, consolidate underutilized stops, improve bus stop infrastructure, and potentially improve fuel economy. So the planning staff identified 18, we actually identified 100 stops for improvements. Facilities took that list and prioritized 18 stops for inclusion in the improvements based on ADA compliance, ridership, infrastructure, customer requests, and demographics. Next slide. So here's sort of a map and showing the stops by jurisdiction. So you can see the 10 stops on Oceanside are largely centered on Mission. There's 5 stops in Vista that are largely focused around Santa Fe Avenue. And then there's stops in Escondido as well, 3 stops. And future phases on this will include improvements to stops in other cities. So this is the start. This is not all of it. So just to kind of give you an example of what we're improving. So you can see the one stop there on North Santa Fe Avenue and Townsite Drive. We do have a bench, we do have a sign, we do have a garbage can. What's missing there is ADA compliance. So we don't have a pad large enough for somebody in a mobility device to wait on the concrete for the bus to come by and pick them up. Over on the other side there, the shelter, as you can see, is it's an older shelter, so it's sort of in bad condition there. That stop will be upgraded as well. It's sort of semi-ADA compliant, so we'll bring it up to full ADA compliance. So the bus stop improvements will vary by stop. We're not going to do the same thing to every stop. On all of them, though, we will be increasing the pad size at the bare minimum to make the stop ADA compliant. We'll also be, in accordance with ridership, installing furniture that would consist of benches and shelters. And again, those are going to come with our bus stop design standards. 10 boardings is going to get a bench. Greater than 20 boardings is going to get a shelter. On some of the shelters, we are looking at installing advertising panels or solar-powered lighting. Those will be both included in options for the bid package when we go out for construction. So a request for statements of qualifications was issued on January 10th to NCTD's on-call architectural and engineering service firms for design services, bid support, and construction support for the bus stop improvements. We received 2 responses. Both responses were deemed responsive and responsible and evaluated by a source selection committee. The source selection committee determined that IBI Group was the highest qualified firm due to the knowledge and experience performing site investigations and work on projects of similar scope. So this, remember, is just for the design. So we anticipate the design will be completed in September of this year, and we'll be placing this out for bid in construction, bid for construction in December, and we plan to award in January of next year. And so staff recommends that the board award the task order agreement number 5 on agreement 16041 with IBI Group for bus stop improvement design services in an amount not to exceed $159,127.77.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, are there any public speakers?
Oh, sir.
All right, Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a few questions, so bear with me. Number one, when will we be doing the improvements in other cities? What's the timeline looking like for that?
As funding becomes available.
Okay.
And I wanted to augment that, though, to say that one of the things I am going to task our team is we're going to identify our top 100 locations in need of improvement, and we're going to actually communicate to each of the different cities. We're going to need your assistance to bring dollars to the table to fund these improvements. A lot of these are your sidewalks and your infrastructure. We're not going to be able to fund the types of improvements that we need to make throughout the network. So within the next 45 days, we will give you a breakdown by each of your localities of locations that we would like you to look at your capital improvement program to make some of these improvements to help move this along. Because for us, it's competing with locomotive, train cars, bridge replacements, bus replacements, facility projects.
Okay. And then can you remind me what the cost differential is for benches versus shelters?
So a bench is roughly $1,000 to $1,500, and a shelter is about $10,000. And a shelter would include a bench in it.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Okay. And you said it was 10
Yeah.
for the, okay. And then how many are going to be getting the bench versus the shelter?
I don't know if I have that right off the top of my head.
Yeah. All 18 are
Oh,
getting,
okay.
so the current list that we have included for the first 18, they're all going to be getting a shelter. Okay. And then my question is, I know that we're basing it off of ridership for whether they're getting a bench or if they're getting a shelter. Do we anticipate, and maybe there's no right answer to this, but do we anticipate lower ridership if we don't make these improvements now in terms of, and I know I've asked this before, the whole chicken and the egg analogy, but I just want to know in terms of that investment, you know, if we don't make it now, are we going to be having to optimize those routes as well?
No, I think the fact of the matter is, and we talked about this last month.
Yeah.
I think we have to focus in on making sure we have the right bus stops at the right location with full infrastructure, including shelters, information from a schedule point of view, and solar lighting. So our goal is to improve all of the shelters to a higher standard. Right now, we're simply constrained by the amount of money that we have available.
Yeah.
And that's why we're going to come to you all to help us leverage.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chairman Feller.
Back in the day, Peter Weiss, our mayor, was involved with that are any of these ones that we're looking at in Oceanside currently of that?
I could answer this way and you can help me. We know as we went through the bus stop optimization, we had also identified shelters within the city of Oceanside. That was the whole old tile hut shelters that were in need of replacement and refurbishment. And for the ones that were going to be retained, I believe I know we did. We sent a letter to the city stating that we would assume the responsibility for that shelter so that we could replace that shelter.
Okay, that's all I need.
Board Member Edson?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. On page 4 of the slides, it talks about improvements, and under benches, it says anti-vagrant. Does that mean benches that do not allow people to lay down? They have the extra, like,
Yeah.
okay. And are all shelter benches anti-vagrant benches as well? And then it mentions under shelters and solar-powered lighting will be bid options. Are we actually going to move forward with solar for each of those?
Depends on how much the bids come in. That's why we put it as options to see if we can afford it within dollars that we have available.
Well, if we aren't doing solar, don't we have to pay an electric bill to light that?
No, not, unfortunately, there's lots of locations where there's no lighting.
I'm hoping that we can do solar. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why we're talking about it,
Right.
because this is part of the hidden things that makes it harder for people to utilize transit is if we don't provide all of these amenities. But again, as I try to say, we're part of the community and we need our cities to actually significantly step up their game in terms of helping us provide the right infrastructure within their cities to make it amenable for people to be able to use public transit 24/7.
Well, with regard to my question about solar, I'm wondering if there isn't some grant money out there for public safety or for adding solar that is efficient.
Our folks, we will be taking a look at that to see what's out there and available.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't want to get in front of MISBA, but is there consideration being given for advertising on these shelters?
Yes.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Board Member Edson, motion. Board Member Drucker is a second. We will now vote.
On the motion of Board Member Joel Edson, seconded by Board Member Dave Drucker to approve agenda item number 14, motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
Thank you. Item 15, Mr. Tucker will review the calendar year 2019 discretionary grants strategy and adopt resolution 1904 in support of this strategy.
So actually, members of our strategic team, Kristen Tuck and Katie Persons will provide this presentation. Kristen is our management analyst within the executive director's department, and Katie is our transit planner for strategic planning. I didn't know what you do.
Thank you. I don't have to do my introduction. So as Matt mentioned, Katie and I will be presenting on NCTD's FY20 discretionary grant strategy, which is updated annually for approval by the board. This presentation will not dive into project status or details, but rather provide the framework for funding NCTD's priority projects. The purpose of developing a discretionary grant strategy is to identify and secure funding for NCTD's capital needs that promote safety, maintain district assets in a state of good repair, meaning all capital assets are meeting NCTD's safety and performance goals within the condition targets established by the district, enhance capacity, increase train frequencies, comply with California Air Resources Board standards, and facilitate regional growth. Next slide, please. Back at the December 20th board meeting, the board approved NCTD's 5-year capital improvement, 5-year financially constrained capital improvement program, which consists of $131 million in capital project needs. The financially constrained needs assume that 36.6 million from the FTA will be made available to the district, now slightly lower at 35.2 million since federal apportionments were released. State of California Carl Moyer program funding of 10 million will be made available for the procurement of 5 replacement locomotives. TIRCP, or Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, funding of 17.7 million will be made available for fencing and signal projects. Additional TIRCP funding will be generated from an on-time performance incentive agreement with LoSAN, which the district may use at its discretion. State of California Low Carbon Transit Operations Program will provide at least 1.6 million annually towards the future purchase of zero-emission buses. State Transit Assistance and State Rail Assistance funding of at least 14.2 million annually, and local revenues, Transnet and TDA, will increase from approximately 55 million in FY20 to 62 million in FY24. So NCTD has 319 million in financially unconstrained capital project needs through fiscal year 2024, as outlined in teal in the respective classifications, 194 million of which is currently unfunded. Notably, however, NCTD has over 1 billion in capital needs as identified currently through fiscal year 2035 that is unfunded, which is why the district is seeking discretionary grant funding. More than 800 million is capacity enhancing and state of good repair projects that SANDAG will be advancing in collaboration with NCTD. Those projects include right-of-way improvements, which address Delmar Bluff stabilization, San Onofre bridge replacement, Rose Creek bridge replacement, various double tracking projects, the convention center platform, and the addition of 3 5-car train sets. NCTD is developing a program of projects to submit for the 2019 Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program grant cycle, which includes all of the LoSAN priority projects. As you are aware and have received some information from the presentations preceding this one, this is the list of NCTD capital priorities. I will now turn it over to my colleague Katie to present the discretionary grants NCTD is pursuing.
Over here. All right, next slide. Here you'll see a list of a few federal grant programs that NCTD regularly participates in. Those first 2 programs, the Bus and Bus Infrastructure Program and the Low or No Emission Vehicle Program, are both programs that provide funding for buses as well as fueling and charging infrastructure. In the past, NCTD has applied for replacement CNG buses, zero emission buses, and ZEB charging infrastructure. I'll talk more about the Low or No Emission Vehicle Program in a later slide because we have an upcoming grant submittal for that program. The next program is the Transit Security Grant Program that makes available $88 million nationally for fiscal year 2019. And we're anticipating submitting an application for an intrusion detection system that will include upgraded and expanded security camera systems. The other 3 programs have not yet released notices of funding availability, and we expect that will occur in the summer and early fall. For the Mobility on Demand program, there is $10 million allocated nationally, and we expect using some identified projects in the Land Use and Transit Integration Study for the Mobility on Demand program. And then the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements, or CRISI program, as well as the Better Utilizing Infrastructure to Leverage Development, or the BUILD program, are usually larger infrastructure investments that support state of good repair or capacity enhancement. And here are 3 major state programs that NCTD anticipates submitting applications for. We've received funding from all 3 of these programs previously. I'll talk more about the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, or TIRCP, application package in the next slide. For the Carl Moyer program, as you heard, we anticipate requesting additional funding for replacement locomotives. And then finally, we have the Caltrans Transportation Planning Grant Program. We've been successful in the last 2 cycles. Our land use study and our strategic multimodal transit implementation planning study is, implementation plan is funded through this program. And we are waiting to hear back on our most recent submittal for the Sprinter Parking Lot Smart Growth Conversion Study. And we're hoping to hear back on this in late May. For the TIRCP program, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, we are working to prepare a task order to procure grant assistance for the development of the TIRCP application package. We anticipate that the call for projects for this program will be in fall 2019. So we're working to prepare the necessary documentation for the list of projects for NCD's capital needs, such as the ones that Kristen mentioned previously. And these projects will enhance service capacity. It'll include double tracking, bridge replacements, locomotive procurement, as well as digital signage and stationary wayfinding. And then our next grant submittal, which we'll be submitting on May 14th, is the Low or No Emission Vehicle Program. We are preparing to request for the pavement of NCTD's Wonder Bread facility, as well as vehicle chargers with solar panels. So we're working through the development of that application package now, and this will help support NCTD's zero emission bus planning efforts and the eventual pilot program. And we will soon be sending out letters of support to our member jurisdictions. So you'll be seeing that soon, which brings us to our next slide on how you can help support NCTD's discretionary grant strategy. So we have an active and aggressive discretionary grant effort, and it includes a lot of coordination with our regional jurisdictions. An important part of the application packages that we submit are the letters of support that show the collaboration and support from our agencies. And how we also demonstrate this regional coordination is through our planning efforts, such as the land use study and the strategic multimodal transit implementation plan. And we will be having, some public outreach for our land use study coming up soon. So we have a lot of strong participation from planning staff throughout the county on that effort. And now we'll open it up for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, are there any public speakers?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Board, questions, comments? Board Member Edson.
Thank you. With regard to the Carl Moyer program, how much additional funding are we going for? $2 billion per loco like we did last time, or?
No, we're going for 12 million, a little over 12 million for the 2 locomotives. Remember, as we explained, the general program rules provides 30,000 something per something. And so this time around, we calculated our maximum eligibility. And this time around, we started earlier enough so that we can now advocate for the state to provide a higher allocation in anticipation that we will be awarded a grant.
Okay, sounds good.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Just a couple of questions for clarification. So I know we talked about the Mobility on Demand Sandbox program. Is this the Mobility Hub program that we're having, or is this a separate? Okay, it's separate. Okay, can you go into it a little bit more in detail? Just the Mobility Hub? The Mobility on Demand.
Oh, yeah. So it's not an annual program. The last cycle was in 2016, and I believe there were 5 projects that were selected with $8 million in funding. So this year we have $10 million available, and eligible projects include, I think the previous one was a trip planning app. There was a carpool program with BART. Let's see what else was there. First last mile solution. So you kind of have that on-demand services that are available. So it's a variety of sort of those micro transit options.
And it was a lot of testing
Okay.
to see kind of the integration of taxis and other services within the paratransit realm. Didn't go so well. But a lot of lessons learned in terms of the regulatory requirements that the federal government places that makes it a little bit challenging for us to provide service as cost effectively as we like. The program administrator is someone I know. One of the things that we have pitched that we're going to reach out to the county is that we want to see if we can stand up a pilot program that's going to be focused in large part on folks who are welfare to work transitioning, and to provide kind of the technologies that they need for us to be able to provide them lower cost transportation and to integrate them into the transportation programs that we're standing up for Mobility on Demand. And that's primarily means getting them smartphones with data, as well as using the banking platform that we are attempting to stand up That's going to be our primary focus, because if we can focus on welfare work as well as low income, that will help us connect those folks within our transportation network to a degree that they're living outside the mainline areas, to connect them in at a lower cost.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And then the last question I had was, I know you mentioned the Sprinter Smart Growth conversion study. Can you talk about that a little bit? I'm not familiar with that as much.
Yeah, we requested $100,000 with a match of $25,000 to take a look at the parking lots along our Sprinter line. There are 8 parking lots that were designated within the study. So we would take a look at what the different development options are for those parking lots, as well as assess the utilization.
A large part, we're looking at those lots potentially for transit-oriented development.
Got it. Great. Thank you.
Vice Chair Feller.
So most of us here are not mayors of the cities. Would you prefer mayors of the cities sending these letters, or is it?
So okay. So can we go to the next slide, Anthony? So as it relates to this action here, obviously we're asking the board to adopt a resolution on a strategy and authorize us to send a letter. So the key piece for us as we move forward into this grant seeking season, as Katie reminded me yesterday, right now the priority is the low-no, so we need to get letters of support. But the bigger picture is we need cities to actually express support, hopefully through adopting a resolution in support of our program of projects. But the other piece, which we found is a key piece, is not all cities have either authorized their mayor or their city manager or anyone to sign a letter in support of NCTD. So the communication is going to go out to ask them to make sure that you've authorized, and it's actually more powerful, yes, if we get that letter from the mayor, and if we can get a letter from every council member from the city and that city council out acting as a whole. So we want to get that out to you all ASAP so that we can get you guys to provide us that support. I think as Katie said, it is actually a meaningful impact to those people who are evaluating grant applications, for them to hear from the public where that project is being proposed, that there's a strong level of community support for making this happen. And so what we're trying to do with this presentation here and sending this letter is to get everyone to get geared up, get the approvals that are needed in place, but to be actively ready when we need those letters to be sent in, and not just one time, but follow-up letters, reaching out on the phone to people to encourage them to provide funding to NCTD.
So what is that time frame?
Oh, we're going to have a letter out to you guys by midweek next week.
But I'm talking about, when do you need, because
we will tell
we put things on the agendas.
We would ask you to get the resolution on your agenda and the designation of people at the soonest at the next council meeting, soon as you possibly can get that done. Okay. ASAP, yesterday.
And are there any discretionary grant programs that might help with quality of life stuff like quiet zones and the supplemental safety measures that would come with that?
Well, so we are at the beginning stages on the TRCP grant program, and we are intending to likely have between an $800 to $1 billion program requested. And it's going to be a significant request. It's going to support a lot of the final double tracking projects for the coastal line, which also includes state of good repair projects like Bridge 243 and things along that line. It's also going to include, and I'm jumping into my other presentation, it's also going to include improvements to the Sprinter corridor, where we're looking to move that from a 30-minute to a 15-minute headway. And as we talked about, we are going to also look to include some community enhancement pieces in there, like quiet zones, into the program to garner as much support as possible for our program of projects.
Excellent. All right, then I would entertain a motion. Board Member Franklin moves. All right, and a second by Jenkins.
I don't know who did it. Sounded like a D voice.
That's okay. Thank you. On to item
read out the
number
vote, sir.
16 and, oh,
Read out the-
oh, he's got to read the vote.
On the motion of Board Member John Franklin, seconded by Board Member Joel Essen to approve agenda item number 15. Motion passes with all board members present voting yes.
All right, well then we've just wrapped up 15. Now we can move on to item 16. Approve request to Sandag for funding coaster equipment in support of service expansion.
It says me, but it's actually Damon and Eric Rowe. Have at it, guys.
All right. We just wanted to kind of give you an example of what our current coaster schedule looks like in the methodology behind why we're asking for additional locomotives. This slide and the next slide kind of gives you an idea of what the wait times are between our current 11 southbound trains, and on the next slide is our 11 northbound trains. And as you can see, it ranges anywhere from, I think our minimum is 25 minutes all the way up to 211 minutes. It's not a very consistent schedule, right? This schedule is largely driven by the amount of double track we have complete, the amount of equipment we have, and the amount of money we have to operate those trains. Go to the next slide. So just as a point of comparison, I wanted to kind of show what some other similar metropolitan area sized agencies are doing. The first line there is obviously us. That 849,000 is the population of our service area. If you look at the San Diego population in conjunction with our service area, that actually jumps up to a little over 3 million. So we are easily the largest population there on that chart. And as you can see, we are pretty much the worst performer on there next to Sound Transit. You've got some pretty small areas, in particular Utah Transit Authority. 63 trains a day. Their peak headway in each direction is 30 minutes. Off peak is 60 minutes. Their span of service is much better than ours. Dallas area rapid transit, again, not an entirely large area, but you're looking at 30-minute peaks and 60-minute off peaks. The ridership on UTA for 2017, which was the last year I could pull data from, was at 4.8 million riders. When you contrast that to us, we're barely over that million mark. So, there's a huge investment in service going on there, but clearly it's paid dividends when a population of 1.8 million is generating 4.8 million rides a year, right? Next slide. So we performed an onboard survey of our current coaster passengers. We also surveyed people who don't ride coaster that are employed at large areas in Carlsbad and Sorrento Valley and San Diego. This was conducted between January 22nd and February 23rd in 2018. We went out, and when I say we hired a consultant to go out and ride trains during the rush hour, non-rush hour, nights, weekends, special events. We tried to get as many surveys as we could. That survey was statistically valid just on the onboard survey alone, but then we also collected surveys, like I said, off-board from employers and online. That survey was entirely designed to drive scheduling decisions. We asked people about where they were making their trips to and from. And what we found, not surprisingly, was that customers desire a wide range of arrival and departure times at Santa Fe, Old Town, and Sorrento Valley, which are your three major employment centers. And when I say wide range of arrival, every 20 or 30 minutes is what they were looking for, not every 25 to 211 minutes. And that desire extended not just in the rush hour, but also in the off-peak midday and in the later evening times as well, so that people could attend special events, go out to dinner, just enjoy the nightlife. We're not able to meet that desired demand with our current schedule or our equipment. So just to give you an idea of some of the enhancements that have been done already on the coaster alignment, as you can see, starting back as far as 2012, and actually I discovered there's a project I left off of here in 2009, the Oceanside Double Track project was completed. So there's a fair number of projects that have been completed over the past 6 years to enhance capacity. The largest capacity enhancing project is undergoing right now. That's Midcoast. That will basically extend double track from the point of the mountain on Miramar all the way into downtown San Diego. So there's a lot of money being poured into this railroad to support higher frequencies. Next slide. So the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan, currently we've invested more than $767 million into the Lausanne corridor for infrastructure improvements and capacity enhancement from Transnet funds. And we are also, as part of Transnet, collecting additional funding to support implementation of the Regional Transportation Plan. And that current 2050 regional plan contemplates 20-minute frequencies on coaster in the rush hour within the 2018 decade. We've collaborated to develop an alternative plan that's a little different from the plan that's contained in the RTP, and that is 30 minutes in each direction for roughly 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening, and 60 minutes in the off-peak. That increases us from 22 trains a day to 42 trains a day, and we believe that that's the sort of best fit for our corridor and our population, given what we've looked at from these other transit agencies. Next slide. So it's a beautiful picture, right? The bluffs, everybody kind of walked up there last weekend. I just wanted to point out, so what this presentation is about is capacity enhancing train sets. So a train set is basically three pieces. You've got the locomotive, which in this picture is the other end of the train. We just bought 5 new Siemens chargers. We've got 2 more that we've asked you to give us a regional limited notice to proceed. Thank you. For some reason, I had regional stuck in my head. And this presentation is asking for a little bit more. And then the other end of the train, the end facing us, is called a cab car. So it looks like a regular passenger car, but it's got a special compartment at the end that allows the engineer to operate that train from either end. So we don't have to turn the train around when we get to San Diego. We can just push and pull from San Diego and Oceanside all day long. And then the cars in the middle are called coach cars. Next slide. So existing, we have 7 locomotives, like Eric was saying earlier, 5 F40s and 2 F59s. We have 28 cars. 10 of those are cab cars and 18 of them are coach cars. What we're looking to add to this is 2 more locomotives and 10 more cars. That would bring us up to 9 locomotives and 38 cars total. Next slide. So the total cost of those 2 new train sets is $43.6 million. So that'll buy us 2 locomotives, 2 cab cars, and 8 coaches. Sandag was required to purchase those capacity enhancing equipment similar to what's being done with the Midcoast project that's underway right now. We've been discussing the need for this new equipment along with the long lead time for delivery. As Eric was pointing out earlier, sometimes that lead time can approach 3 years for a locomotive. To achieve our plans and the public demand for increased coaster frequencies, the NCTD board and the Sandag board need to provide leadership to identify the funding necessary to purchase that capacity enhancing equipment. So our recommendation is to approve and execute a letter to the San Diego Association of Governments, or Sandag, requesting the scheduling of an item on a future Sandag board agenda to provide funding for those 2 additional train sets to support the implementation of increased coaster frequencies as specified in the 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Questions, Supervisor Desmond?
So is it just a matter of the locomotives and the train sets versus double tracking at all? So if you got the train sets, you can do that the 3 hour every half hour, so 3 hours in the morning and the evening with the current existing tracks.
Right. So once we get to the completion of the Midcoast project, we have enough double track to support 30-minute frequencies in the rush hour.
And when's that double tracking via Midcoast going to be done?
2021 is the estimate that I have.
Okay. All right.
And just clarify, because you keep saying Midcoast.
Yes.
The Midcoast
Sorry,
is
sorry. Okay, yeah, let me clarify. So as part of the Midcoast project, they're building the Midcoast trolley. The Midcoast trolley project also includes double tracking the Lausanne corridor between Miramar and San Diego, in essence. There's a couple of double track sections there already, but basically it makes that entire corridor double track.
Okay.
So that track capacity enhancement, along with the work that's already been done further north that I outlined in that earlier slide, allows us to get to 30-minute frequencies once we have that additional equipment. Correct.
So if you noticed in your agenda packet, we have drafted a letter, and it has the signature block of each board member should this be approved. So we would be looking to get your signature on the letter, which we would then transmit to Board Chair Voss and the CEO. Yep. Well, this is going to go to Steve Voss and Hassan, and we're going to ask that it get on an agenda. But my hope is that my expectation is that it'll start at the Transportation Committee, and so my hope is that the chair there will facilitate a good conversation.
Well, if you get it, I can get it agendized if that helps.
That does help.
Okay.
Board Member Edson.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for the presentation. The 30-minute frequency, once NCTD has the dollars to create these capacity enhancements, does that mean the 30-minute frequency is all coaster, or is that coaster plus Amtrak?
No, the 30 minutes is strictly coaster, and so you would have on top of that the Amtrak frequencies.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Franklin.
Have we identified where the operation budget to operate these trains is going to come from?
Yes, and so this is the kind of the great thing. I just want to make sure I push my thumb down on a little bit. So the region will have spent more than $800 million on capital improvements. We've been collecting the revenue for the operating expenses since Transnet came in place. So the only thing that is remaining is the vehicles. And the parallel example that I give is, can you imagine if they actually built the Mid-Coast project and said we forgot to purchase trains? Think about it. And so the operating money is there. We've had the discussions with Sandak to true up the numbers. So this is strictly the case of getting the money for the vehicles so that we can operate this service.
Follow up on that. I know that the operation dollars in Transnet were like $2 billion, I think, is that for transit operations. And is that, I understand we've kind of spent through that faster than we're collecting it.
No, so this is 8.1. Did I get it right? It's 8.1 Transnet for capacity enhancing new projects. I think Sandak is sitting on a healthy pot of money because they've been collecting those revenues with limited services being operated today.
Okay.
But that'll all be fleshed out, I assume, in the conversation that those are pretty important details.
There's many different pots of money and the shells keep moving. I just have to figure out where they are.
Just for clarity point, we've had all of these discussions with Sandak. There's no debate. The operating money is there. The capital infrastructure will be there. We just need a push by elected officials to say you have to find the money for the equipment.
It's already there.
All right, I would entertain a motion. Board Member Drucker made a motion, seconded by Vice Chair Feller. We will now vote.
On the motion of Board Member Dave Drucker, seconded by Board Vice Chair Jack Feller to approve agenda item number 16. Motion passes with all board members present.
Okay. We got you for 5 more minutes. All right, we're moving on to informational item number 17. Receive Executive Director's report on proposed FY 2020 budget guidance and strategic areas of focus.
This is going to take a little while. And you have the letter in your packet.
Oh, I have.
Yes. So I provided an update at the last executive committee meeting covering my budget guidance and some of the strategic areas that we're going to focus in on the upcoming fiscal year. What I want to do now is just walk the full board through this. Just in the course of the budget development process, I want to make sure you guys understand kind of the tracks that things are. I went to the executive committee and did the budget guidance and strategic initiatives to garner feedback from the executive committee. You and our chief financial officer went to the performance and administration and finance committee today to provide a pretty detailed presentation as it relates to the development of the FY20 budget. And next month at the marketing service and planning development committee, staff will provide a presentation to that committee related to the service implementation plan, i.e. how we plan to operate transit operations over the next 5 years, pardon me. So now I'm at this point to provide this to give the board members opportunity to provide feedback to the executive director and to staff relative to development of the budget. I will say just within the context of the development of the budget, we are focusing in on not just the 1 year, but a 5-year strategy related to the budget. In terms of the presentation today, I'm going to walk you through a little bit the context of things that are going on as we look at developing the budget. I'm going to talk a little bit about our strategic initiatives and then have some time left at the end for board discussion and feedback. If I'm going too fast, slow me down. If you want me to go fast, just speed me up. Just from a high level point of view in terms of ridership, I think we've talked about it ad nauseum in terms of modal ridership trends, in terms of at the national level. Your next slide, Anthony. And in terms of at NCTD level, that transit ridership, particularly at the bus system level, has been declining downward. We've talked from the retreat to other months in terms of why that is occurring. And those factors remain the same in terms of vehicle availability shift that occurred as part of the Great Recession. I will also note, as I've previously noted, that like most trends, there are lots of reasons that drive these trends. I took a look again yesterday at vehicle miles traveled. We had a period within the U.S. before the Great Recession and then headed into the Great Recession where vehicle miles traveled reduced. And so from both point of view, I wouldn't have advocated to take down roads when vehicle miles were traveling, nor would I say shut down transit system when ridership is going through a trend. You have a question? Yes.
Just looking at the trend nationally and then locally in terms of bus ridership, it appears to be, and I was looking at this when we were presented with it during the PATH committee meeting, it appears to be lower than the national average. Would you say that would be accurate?
That our rate is declining less than, yes.
Our rate is declining less than the national average?
Let me see, let me look.
I would
Let me
say
go
that
back.
it looks higher.
Well, I won't guess because I don't have the percentage
Okay.
in front of me, but I would say in terms of historically, what I've seen is we've been in line at the general framework that the rail ridership has not been down as much as the bus ridership. And then within the Southern California, when we benchmarked against MTS, Orange County, LA Metro, that our performance was within those trends.
So they're comparable with those other areas?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So kind of from a local funding point of view, I think we've all heard the discussions about the status of Transnet and the ability for Transnet to generate the types of revenue to complete the types of projects that were originally envisioned. And so from a practical point of view, much of what Sandag is going to be doing is on a pay-as-you-go basis. If you look again at the $1 billion plus of unfunded needs that we have, a significant part of those, more than 800 million, were projects that Sandag was intended to advance under the Transnet program. State funding, we talked about it a couple of meetings ago in terms of SB1 and the benefits that it has provided to the district. I will say that we did receive a TRCP grant last year. We still have not programmed those dollars. We're pending execution of agreements, but those will have positive impacts to our operating capital budget. So state side is looking good. Next slide. We've shown this slide before in terms of the significant impact to NCTD. Without SB1, we would really be in a world of hurt. Next slide. So public transportation and passenger rail funding levels, if you can click again, Anthony, you can see that we actually have been ahead of the FAST Act authorized funding levels, which has been really, really good. Unfortunately, there's a lot of uncertainty around the federal budget, particularly as it relates to deficits and potential actions to mitigate some of the 1 trillion annual deficits that are projected. Next slide. Highway Trust Fund, we talked about it at a couple of meetings ago about it going into the red, which means that the federal government would have to go to the general fund to make up for that decline or erosion in the Highway Trust Fund revenues. So there's some economic uncertainty. You know, it's kind of like going in both directions. You hear positive information, but you also hear slowing. We heard a little bit about the inverted yield curve and what that may portend for the country in terms of a potential recession. So we have to take all of those things into consideration as we develop a budget. So I wanted to show you guys the slide that you guys gave me as the welcome gift when I came to NCTD. If you can click again, Anthony, the district was faced with 5-year deficits that totaled more than $83 million. If you recall this time period in terms of the Great Recession, there were significant reductions in terms of sales tax revenue. One of the examples that I'd like to point out was that at one point we were supposed to receive about $52 million in sales tax revenue, and we received $37 million. So you get to $20 million annual deficits really, really quick for the district. And so when the economy goes bad, it can be significantly devastating to our bottom line. So Yoon presented this a little bit earlier, but it's the same case for us. We obviously face some pressure points like everyone else in terms of our budget. Key piece is, you know, the capital needs in excess of $1 billion. That is fairly significant. On the operating budget side, you are now having to take the positive train control and move it from a capital project into our operating budget. And so the operating and maintenance of that is going to be more than $3 million of new expense added to our budget. And we are going to have to work through how do we minimize that impact to our budget. That includes trying to work with Amtrak and BNSF and others to help share some of these increased costs associated with implementing positive train control. Next slide. At the same time you have all of that going on, I hear a ton of discussion within this region about more transit service, increasing frequencies, and improving the quality of service. So I feel a little bit schizophrenic in terms of what the talk is between the challenges that we have, that we don't have any money, but we want to do more things. And so we try to take all of these things into consideration as we develop the budget and the 5-year strategy. So in terms of the 5-year strategy, we will be focusing on improving service frequencies. And this is for our bus, coaster, and sprinter services. The goal is to implement 30-minute peak service frequencies for the coaster. And everything that I'm saying is we want to get it done within this 5-year window. We want to implement 15-minute frequencies for the sprinter, and we want to improve frequencies on the main line of the Breeze bus network and implement comprehensive programs for first and last mile services. That's what is predicated upon this budget for first fiscal year 2020. We do see service levels as relatively flat, but we want to see that growth in the latter part of that 5-year period. Next slide. We also want to make phased implementation improvements for our wayfinding program and digital signage throughout our system. If you go out to our platforms today, it's fairly deficient in terms of information. So the future for us is that we would have real-time passenger information related to the arrival of all trains on the corridor. So if you're at that platform, you're going to know where the Amtrak train is, where the Metrolink train is, where the coaster train is. Standing at that platform, you're going to also have digital information about buses coming into that facility so that you know what time the buses are coming in. We've completed the preliminary studies that are associated with this. We're in the process of collaborating at different spaces to be able to implement improvements. So one of the examples I would tell you is we're part of a statewide initiative to look at passenger information displays and creating a signage look and feel that would be consistent using technology that would allow it to be easier for people, again, to know exactly what the status of their train is. Mobility hub programs, we've been working primarily with the city of Carlsbad as well as with Sandag on a series of projects and also Cal State San Marcos to really start pushing the mobility hub concepts. We will have a specific presentation associated with the status of those projects at the May board meeting. But this is something significant for us because we know one of the areas of uncertainty, because if you go and look at I-5 and in 78 and you see all of the cars, a lot of the uncertainty for people is what do I do once I get into the station? How do I get to my last mile? How do I continue to be able to move on uninterrupted? And so we have to provide solutions to people so that they can have that answer in a seamless way without going 4 to 5 different places to plan that trip. Next slide. As we've talked about today, we want to do a lot of revenue vehicle modernization that ranges from the locomotives to replacement of our compressed natural gas vehicles. So this budget assumes over a 5-year period, we're going to replace 80 of our CNG vehicles as we implement our battery electric bus program. And that's significant for us because one of the things that we have to do is we do have to give the industry time to allow for this technology to be matured. And we have to work through how do we ensure that we can operate battery electric buses as cost effective as we can with our compressed natural gas vehicles.
Matt, you just said replace 80 compressed natural gas vehicles, replace them with new compressed natural gas vehicles, but not with new 80 new
Correct.
electric. Okay.
Correct.
I got all excited for a minute.
No, that's
Sorry.
$80 million.
Thanks.
Sorry to take away your excitement. Next slide, please. Technology upgrades. Obviously, you all are aware of the regional fare collection system. I think on the agenda today also was a customer relation management software tool that we're looking to roll out. We also are working on different applications that would be rolled out to help connect the transit services that exist within this region and within Southern California. We're also looking to advance our transit-oriented development projects in a pretty significant way. We're hoping to finalize an agreement with the city of Solana Beach to advance a TOD project there. We have a program schedule set up for the Oceanside Transit Center oriented development. I think the RFP will be posted prior to the end of this year. We're planning to do some workshops prior to that bid being posted. The key piece is we are wanting to make sure that procurement process can be tied in with other grant initiatives that can help defray the cost of the public improvements, i.e. building a parking deck. Escondido Transit Center, a transit-oriented development that is also tied into the electric vehicle facility project improvements, believe it or not. Part of that study is going to look at the reconfiguration of that property to support both the expansion required for electric vehicle maintenance and operations, but also how much of that property then would be made available for transit-oriented development project. We also have significant projects related to the need to build a signal and maintenance away building. Right now, we lease a facility in Oceanside off of Rancho Del Oro, and we're looking to advance a project for the construction of a facility and avoid paying lease fees. And we also are looking at advancing the reconstruction of this building at the Carlsbad Village Transit Center during this 5-year time period. So my budget guidance was enhanced performance management. And so within that framework, we want to focus on expense management and cost recovery. We have a consultant study already underway related to our indirect cost allocation and fees and fee schedule. And so we look to bring that back to the board to be incorporated in the fiscal year 21 timeframe to help us fully recover our costs. We are highly focused in on cash flow management. I think over the last year, we've done the best job that we've done at NCTD, at least during the decade that I've been here, in terms of cash flowing projects to be able to leverage and do a lot more projects. But as we move forward, we're going to have to be really good at this because we really want to avoid any debt financing, whether it be short or long term. Project management and delivery. One of the core functions that my team has taken on is making sure that we provide appropriate oversight and a framework for delivery of projects on time and under budget. We have to make sure that it's a core principle of everything that we do, that we get projects completed in a timely manner. This last one is the one of great consternation everywhere, is zero delay transit operations. As I said to staff, the simple thing that I know is no one that I know has a car that breaks down once a month. And when I asked people that question, I said, so does your car break down once a month? No. Would you keep your car if it broke down once a month? No. So within the transit realm, our vehicles break down more than once a month. And so this is about a culture change within the industry, but since I don't run the industry, we're going to start here at NCTD. And so we have been focused in on the beginning phases of talking about how we are going to change the paradigm in terms of the level of detail and the quality of maintenance and operations that needs to take place to really go out publicly to start talking about zero delay. And zero delay is not just in terms of making sure that all of the vehicles operate on time. It's also delivery of projects on time. It's also in solving customers' needs and expectations. But this is a big initiative for us, and we're going to bring a lot of the resources to bear to make this change in culture, to get folks focused in on how do we do that. And a lot of this is through process and procedures and making sure people understand the level of detail that needs to happen for us to operate without any delay. Our focus within this budget is to increase ridership and customer revenue. The key piece to me is, you can kind of do your own eyeball test. And if you look at the level of congestion on the 78 and on the 5, clearly there's opportunities out there. And right now, our services are not operated in a manner that it can really compete to give people a solid choice in terms of what they should be doing on a day-to-day commute. And so the proposal that we had in the prior slide in terms of services will put us on a different platform, will allow us to effectively compete and grow our ridership and customer revenue. The next one is optimized expenses. That is a focus of the district all day long, is how do we continue to drive down costs? How do we leverage our technologies to give us the benefits of efficiencies that we expected when we purchased them? And within the realm of the positive train control is we're going to be looking at how can we drive that cost down over time. If you kind of understand the history of that project, so much of that project is embedded with a sole proprietor company. And you don't have a lot of options. In fact, you practically only have 1 to 2 options at all in terms of who can actually provide you a system. But we're going to have to work through and do some studies to figure out how we can leverage with others or look at other things that we can do to drive that cost down, because $3 to $5 million added to our budget for the system is not sustainable. We're going to have to prepare for economic downturn. And, the reason that I talk so much about this is because if you look at the normal economic cycles of the US, every 10 years, we're normally having a recession. For transit agencies, we're like a tanker. Trying to turn it around when revenues go down is really hard. So I've directed our staff by the end of the year to put together a cost reduction package so that we can have that package in our pocket. We can update it over time. And if something were to come up, we would be in a better position and fully understand the timeline of changes that we would need to make. But it's better to be prepared and not to use it than not to have it and need it and then be delayed implementing it. Strategic risk taking. You've done some of that today, so thank you. We appreciate that. We are going to have to walk a little bit by measured faith. And what I've found is that if we are not aggressive about making our case and getting our priorities met, we're not going to get anything. And so for us, we believe we're in a good cash position that we can cash flow some things, but we also are going to have to take some risks to make sure that we're able to get to where we need to be. We obviously need to focus on our state of good repair and priority capital needs. And we're going to assume as part of this budget process that the board is going to be a key part of helping us make this happen. That you all are going to lead us through this, that you're going to be talking to local, state, and federal elected officials, and that you're going to be our best advocates for helping us achieve the results that we're trying to achieve over the next 5 years. Because without the board support, without the political support of our mayors and our city councils, we're not going to be able to get people to pay attention. And I can tell you, kind of like a fly or gnat, that if you're buzzing around people's ear all day long about money, they're more likely to give you money. And so it's just important that we do that.
Matt, are you going to create flashcards for us again, talking point flashcards?
Absolutely.
'Cause I think those were really beneficial.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So we're at this point for board discussion, for you all to provide some policy direction to me, kind of, taking into consideration your public policy goals and expectations and the financial and economic considerations that I've laid out and the regulatory environment that we exist. You're required to adopt an operating capital budget on an annual basis that is balanced. I will tell you there's no action that you could actually take that doesn't carry risk. So whatever direction you go, there's measured risks that are taken no matter what. I would just close by saying this is a significant time period for the district. We do need to really step up our game so that we could be a more viable choice. We also need to focus in on how we grow our revenue. And so for me, in looking at this budget, I want to make sure that we got 100% buy-in for the board and commitment by the board to provide kind of the push that we need to be successful.
Okay, thank you, sir. Comments, questions? Board Member Edson.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. So one of the things I wanted to mention and actually support was, Matt, you talked about zero delay transit operations. And I know that that's a big goal and, maybe not 100% obtainable, but in looking at our staff report and the item on consent, which we receive often about performance, it talked about there were 63 coaster complaints received in February. More than 50 were due to an incident when a train terminated due to a mechanical issue. So to me, one of the greatest things we can do, in addition to creating more frequency, is reliability, that our passengers need to know that they can get there on time. And that really drives the decision to get new mechanical locomotives, things that actually function and work and aren't causing all kinds of mechanical delays and problems. But also it's just building that trust with the public that that public transit is something that is actually going to work for them and get them there. So I just wanted to mention those numbers from the staff report because I think that really reinforces what you said about the zero delay transit operations.
Thank you. Vice Chair Feller.
Thank you. How old are the Springer DMUs now?
They were delivered in 2006. So if you add that age up.
I think we have to think about that.
Well, so just to give a general update, the Sprinter trains right now are going through, we're at the latter stages of the first major overhaul for the Sprinter vehicles. And we are already conducting a study about the next overhaul for the Sprinter and potentially even modernizing these vehicles to maybe hybrid technology. At the same time, we've already completed some studies about the next vehicle technology that we would pursue as it relates to the Sprinter vehicle. But right now, given all of the capital needs that we've identified, we have to ride that horse a little while longer. Those vehicles have expected useful life of 27 years. So those vehicles are not due for replacement until 2033. And if you were to try to replace them ahead of 2033, you would have to pay back the contingent interest value to the federal government.
I'll be 85 then. The other question I had is the 125,000 we talked about for the studies of the transit the stations on the Sprinter.
Yes.
I think mostly is what you were referring to.
Yeah, so that's a study. That's a study to take a look at the development of. Originally, there are a number of parking lots. I think we identified 8 parking lots along the Sprinter corridor that we're going to look at how they are currently being used and whether or not they can be converted to support housing. And so that's what that study is all about.
So I would suggest that if we're trying to do transit-oriented development, that's a key piece, and I would proceed with a lot of haste. I mean, I think you can get some revenue out of that.
Yeah, and we're going to work closely with our cities as we go through that study if we're successful in receiving that grant.
Board Member Bob Patel.
Thank you, Matt. So few questions. One is on on ours it says slide 14. I'm assuming it's a different slide number since I'm seeing 96 on here, but it's basically under improved service frequencies for the fiscal year 2020 to 2024. Looking at the first bullet point where we're talking about improving service frequencies for the Breeze and implementing a comprehensive program for the first mile, last mile. My question is, how are we hoping to achieve this? Are we looking at micromobility? Are we looking at public-private partnerships? Share programs, all of the above?
Literally all of the above.
Okay. And in that sense, are we going to be utilizing, obviously we're doing the Mobility Hub project in Carlsbad. Is that data then going to be utilized to figure out how we would go ahead and achieve these first mile, last mile?
It's going to inform, and in fact, so that project is even beyond just the city of Carlsbad,
of course, yeah.
Sorrento Valley. We're going to also look at Camp Pendleton as an example, because Camp Pendleton is not an efficient area to try to serve with fixed route bus services. And so we have a generally pretty good idea of what needs to be done. It's just that this is a very detailed step-by-step process to make sure you get it right for each of these different service areas.
Sure. And then my next question is, I know that at the Sandag retreat, they had talked about an app that I believe NCTD is part of also. It's called the Transit app, where people can see how they can be connected to different modes of transit, right?
Yes.
So regarding that, are we going to think about ways, not only that particular app, but are we going to think about ways that people can access that type of information to ensure that once they've finished riding the coaster, the bus, whatever it is, that they then know how they can get to their their destination? Yes.
And so, and I'll give you an example. So yesterday we went to Orange County and met with Metrolink and with Losan. And we started looking at, we had a presentation from a company that has an app. And before I get into too much of this, I would just say at the end, there are going to be a number of apps that are going to be made available. And I think people, based upon what they're trying to do, is going to opt to an app that best meets their need. But in the case of someone who's a commuter rail or intercity rail traveler, we're looking at an app that would allow you to be able to get a fully integrated trip. So that would include integration with Uber, Lyft, taxi, so that when you book that trip, you would also be able to figure out your first and last mile. And even with the overlay that we've talked about, that we are wanting Sandag to execute an agreement on our behalf with Uber and Lyft, so that if you do have the app, that you can, within a geofenced area, get your last mile trip with that as well. So those are the kinds of things that we're intending to do. I think each market for transit is likely to say this app works best for me.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to do, is make it more market segmented to the different types of ridership markets.
Okay, and then what about those? I know we talked about those that may not have access to smartphones and such. What about those that won't be able to access? Will that be the displays that we were talking about? That would be the way that they would have that real-time information.
So my goal is, and I think I've said this to you before, we've done some research around the fact that California already has a low-income telephone program, and then there's a federal program for used telephones. We're going to try to see if we can tap in that. It was one of the things that we talked about in terms of LC top programs, and so we believe more effort and more thoughtfulness is going to have to be out there from the public sector side, to say that if we want to be able to connect people with really good transportation choices to help people transition and work and get to places at lowest cost, we're going to have to figure out how to connect them with devices like smartphones that can help drive down the cost of transportation.
Okay.
Because, you know, the cost delta between someone trying to draw a fixed route line for someone who may live in the hinterland area versus somebody who could book a short trip, get into your service area and be on a main line that's operating every 15 minutes, it's pretty significant.
Okay. Just a couple more questions.
No worries.
So what are our, I know we talked about some of our transit-oriented development projects. What are we looking at in terms of those projects? Do we have that mapped out yet? Are we still thinking about it? What does that look like? And then kind of to tag team off of that, I know you mentioned the Carlsbad Village Center for the reconstruction of the admin building. Is my administration aware of that?
Yes, they are.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. And so to go in reverse, each of these transit-oriented development projects is unique in terms of the community expectations and what the community will accept, and i.e. what the city council will approve. And so our strategy is custom tailored around that. And so as we alluded to, likely with Solana Beach is that we're going to enter into an agreement with the city of Solana Beach that would support the development of infrastructure to create a transit-oriented development project, whether that be through a joint powers agreement or something along that line. As it relates to Oceanside, we've had significant conversations with the city. We have a good understanding what the city is intended to do. So we're going to develop a more performance-based scope of work that would allow the highest and best use for that property. And so again, the timeline is this year to get that out to bid, to be timed with a state grant that will be accepting applications in March of 2020.
And then we also had Escondido on the list, right?
Well, we had Escondido on the list because that's going to be tied to the facility study that we're doing for zero emission bus infrastructure, which is going to require us to expand our operations footprint over into that area. But we want to make sure that we can designate a portion of that parcel for a transit-oriented development project.
Great, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Board Member Drucker.
Excellent presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. You know, these are very aggressive and somewhat goals. And just thinking about them, there's going to be a lot of sub-goals and projects to get there. And focus on areas where expenses can be reduced. And there's also things to be done for phase service improvements. And I think what would be important is as the details are flushed out, that the board be apprised of some of the details and how they're working to determine, you know, so that we get some feedback on them and we can see how the performance is happening. Otherwise, you know, like all good intentions thrown out the wayside. Absolutely. And let me talk a little bit about that, because I think sometimes when we talk at the high level of this PowerPoint, it obviates, you know, the whole fact that there's a lot of detail to go along with this work. And so I'll talk a little bit about Sprinter frequency improvements. Because we have largely a brand new board, you may or may not be aware of the fact that over the last 7 to 8 years, we have been doing significant kind of mini studies to look at what we can do to improve the speed of the Sprinter and frequencies of the Sprinter. And so we have those studies already completed. And one of the things that we're going to do is that in the course of doing the baseline original study, it identified less than $100 million needed to go to a 20-minute frequency, and that included equipment, which, you know, at the time that we looked at it, the TRCP program didn't exist. And so you kind of do that study and then you go like, oh, well, we'll just wait for Transnet to come in and we'll say, Sandak, here's an option. Now the TRCP program exists. And when you look at the GHG benefits and the ridership benefits of moving from a 30-minute to a 15-minute headway, and if you look at that in the context of a validated project of $100 million, then that project should compete really, really well in terms of a cost-benefit ratio. So one of the key steps that we're going to do is we have written a scope of work. We're doing an independent cost estimate right now, and we're going to have a consultant go through and validate the infrastructure that is needed to support our grant application. Once they validate the infrastructure that is needed, we're going to have an engineering firm validate the cost estimate as we submit our grant application for TRCP. So none of this is speculative. This is kind of, we've done some work that gives us good faith justification for what we're trying to do. On the coaster side, it's not a heavy lift at all. It's not a dream. It's all about us standing up and say, we would never build a project in South San Diego and not provide vehicles to operate it. So that's an easily doable thing. Reconfiguration of the bus network is kind of easy to do. Implementation of the pilot programs, that's why we're starting them right now, so that we can succeed and maybe sometimes not succeed, but adjust accordingly to be able to move it. So while some of this will look aggressive, it's not that aggressive if we believe that we are entitled to the same $1 billion that Metrolink received in the last TRCP award. Okay. And that's the big piece to me, is that nothing that I'm going to propose is not something that I don't believe there's a clear basis. Because keep in mind, the capital infrastructure improvements on the coaster will already be there by 2021 without any additional dollars. All we need is the vehicles to make that happen. So the additional money that we're talking on the coaster is about even more capacity on the railroad. Okay. So that's not a heavy lift. Yes, we can say $100 million on the $100+ million on the Sprinter is money, but within the realm of somebody getting $1 billion, it's not kind of unreasonable. So generally speaking, a lot of what we're talking about is very reasonable if we put the work in and make sure we get the funding that we deserve.
What?
I do. Hey, no, this is our time. All right. So my other question, so I'm looking here and we have on the second to last slide, we say the board will provide policy direction to the executive director, right? Are you looking for that today? And if so, how is the board prepared for that is my question. I feel like we should be discussing it, and I do want to have a robust discussion on what our policy direction would look like. So that's my question to you.
Right. So in general, you would say, hey, we don't like any of that stuff. Do something different. Or do something more of this or more of that. But in general, what I'm putting forward is in line with the existing regional transportation plan. So from a policy point of view, this is something, everything that I'm putting forth is already established within the current regional transportation plan.
Okay. However, if we do want to have a more robust discussion,
that's up to you guys.
That would be just to, but only I understand that, and I appreciate that. However, what I'm asking is, are you looking for that? I mean, you know, it's here. So I guess, are you looking for that today? And if so, should we be then having that discussion in terms of the policy direction? Because I feel like, sure, it's part of the regional transportation plan, but at the same time, there might be things outside of that we may want to focus on. So that's where I'm asking. And I know we discussed this when we met. So
yeah,
that's where I'm trying to ask for some clarity.
Yeah. So generally speaking, if there's something else in addition,
yep,
I would love to hear what those additional things are so that the board could hear those things and then provide me direction about those things if the board wants to add additional focus or additional activities.
And if we don't have that today, when can we discuss that?
No,
would that be in June then?
No, June is likely to.
Or May.
Yeah, May.
May. Okay.
At the May budget presentation, at that point, you should provide all of that feedback. I'm happy to meet with any board member to talk through any priorities that board members have. I've done that in the past. So just let me know and I will come out and meet with you.
Great. Thank you.
Board Member Jenkins.
So I think this would be exciting if we could do this all in 5 years. Good luck. I have a question for you about the transit-oriented development. So you say there's a study happening with a consultant and all that, I believe, correct?
We're pursuing grant funds for
Grant
the
funds.
for the repurposing of the Sprinter studies.
Okay, so when you talk about the different areas for development, you know, there's a benefit to NCTD, there could be benefits to the city to provide more housing, that sort of thing. Are you including discussions with the developers? Because obviously, you know, all legs of the stool has to work out for everybody.
Yes, so we do, so specifically for the Oceanside Transit Center one, which is planning, as we're planning a formal process, we are going to have those kind of workshops for developers,
Okay.
so that they are able to ask us questions, talk to us before we go into bid, and also be able to go and talk to the cities and understand what the city's expectations are around that project.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Drucker?
Sorry. My comment was basically so that we could have some type of discussion as these start happening to see whether or not we need to, you know, change course or whatever. And that's.
And I will tell you, so what we will do is within our budget, our budget includes the strategic business initiative section. And what we will do is we will make sure, Dave, that we come back on a quarterly basis to talk about the strategic business initiatives. And they will cover the types of projects that we're talking about here, as well as the divisional goals that are embedded in that document.
Okay, so this was an informational item only. No vote is required. And we will move on to the next item, which is the Executive Director's Report. Mr. Tucker.
Nothing.
Nothing. Discretion is the better part of valor, yes. Any board members have anything they would like to report? Board Member Jenkins.
I would just like to make a comment. Some of us attended the bluff stabilization workshop this past Saturday, and I just want to compliment staff. There was a lot of staff there on Saturday on their day off, for most of them probably. And I asked Matt for some numbers. There were 17 attendees from 10 different state and local agencies. There were 6 people from Sandag, or engineering consultants. There was 4 from Bombardier, 16 from NCTD, and we had 7 sheriff's deputies along the way. Also, when I drove up, I thought there was a SWAT action going on or something, because they were up and down the street. So again, I just wanted to thank staff and just say I think it was time well spent, and appreciate you putting it together. And I think we all have to work together to keep moving that priority forward.
Yeah, the police force was there in case there were any riotous Dalmatians that were wanting to protest future fences or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, they did, right in front of us.
Yeah.
I would echo.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you putting this together and getting, you know, other board members understanding what the block is like.
Yes, and I think that the conversations that were had on the walk, as well as in the presentation, were very useful. And the goal of the workshop was to keep policymakers focus on the stabilization of that bluff as a critical piece of infrastructure, not just for our region, but Southern California. So I think we accomplished our goal. Thank you very much for putting that together. And I too want to applaud the staff that were there and helped us to put that on. Are there any other comments from board members?
Real quick, I think in the Transportation Committee coming up here soon at Sandag, our Executive Director Hassan, I think, is going to give his vision of how to fix the Del Mar Bluffs by trenching. So That'll be interesting.
Well, yeah, and, you know, I think that it's important to continue the conversations with the various alternatives, but the critical issue is to make sure that we get to that project 6 and get the funding to do all the stabilization projects. We've done 3, we've got 3 more to go. And so if we can keep people, that's kind of, it's short term in government speak, but, you know, it is down the road a little bit, but we desperately need to keep people's eye on the ball.
And I agree with you.
Good. We will keep
I'm
on
just
that.
telling you the other way.
I appreciate that. All right. Any other comments? That means that do we have any other public speakers?
No, sir.
All right. I am adjourning this meeting to Jack. Yeah, he says he wants to go. Thank you.